Right, I can start putting things back in here. We'll start with this little cam plate arrangement. I'm just running some molybdenum paste around that edge surface. And put that in place. Little pinion that couples to that is this thing. It's got a slight small tab sticking up on one surface that engages with that notch in here. A little shim wash that runs on the top of that, very fine. And this spring which holds it down in place. Make sure that's nice and tight, make sure that thing swings. If the shutter was cocked, we should be able to open the blades with that. The shutter's cocked. If this was to swing around, it should pick that up and open the blades for viewing. It does. Back to the rest position. There's another small pinion that goes on this shaft. And it goes flat side down. Fits over that D-shaped shaft like that. Release that shutter. Now the rack that couples those two together can go in, giving that a light wipe of molybdenum paste both sides. Now getting this correctly placed is a bit of an act. Okay, I'll zoom you in a bit now. This might not be focused entirely well because it doesn't like zooming in this much. That'll do. Okay, so the first notch in the teeth at the bottom of the rack here is on the top of the tooth for our bottom wheel. Now this is with the shutter in the uncocked position. And the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth notch in the rack at the top engages with the tooth on the bottom of this gear at the top of the shutter. Now I've just jumped that out of position. Our lever here, our cam, is back pretty much against the post at the top, so it's rotated fully clockwise pretty much as far as it goes. That would appear to be correct to me. That looks like the correct positioning. We've got this wheel and the bush that it runs around. So I'll wipe some molybdenum paste through the centre of that wheel. Now one side of the wheel is dead plain, it's dead flat. The other side you can see it's got a ring on it. The ring should face forward. fit that in there and engages with the top of that rack. Got two spacer washers that go in here. And this plate, now I'm just going to wipe the underside of that plate with molybdenum paste, and likewise in that hole in the centre that runs around that raised end of that pinion. You see what I'm doing there? Yeah, you can just about see. The two screws pass through the plate, through the washers if I haven't got them out of position, and hold that down firmly. Do those screws up tight. That looks good. This lever needs to go in. Now on this lever, the lever goes in this way up. It's lifted on the top of that rack, raises this, so I need to run some molybdenum paste around the boss on the back of this thing. And once through the centre here at the pivot point certainly doesn't hurt. I've got to get this wriggled in under here because it was a bit reluctant. Now I've got to see if I can get this under here. Now don't force this little plastic insulator on the top there. If it comes adrift, you'll have to glue it back in place. If it won't fit down through the hole neatly, you'll need to remove this screw, take that bracket off so that you can get it in there, and then put that back afterwards. So that's in. I can get its fixing screw in place. Now that's a shoulder screw. That lever must be able to revolve around the head of that screw. That looks good. I'll tighten that up. Okay, that should be pretty much complete. I'll try cocking this, releasing it, lifting this, action completes. That's all good, that's running nice and smooth. Okay, well that's gone very well. Make sure that screw's tight. The insulator that went over the wire there was a fibre washer. Get that hooked over that connection. Now that would have been originally glued down in place, but I've found in practice you don't need to do that. Fold that connection down a bit. Now I've got to solder this wire back in place there, right there. So I'll go and do that. Before I do that, I suppose I can put the shutter release back on here. Now I have cleaned that front surface. There's still a mark there where that corrosion was, and it's in the shape of a fingerprint, which I think is interesting. It just shows that someone picked that up Let's get this seated in position anyway. Let's screw in place. And this screw in the lower position. Here's our return spring. That looks good. Let's cock that again. That feels pretty good. Now that's always going to be operating under tension here, so let's wind a little bit of tension on there and check the action. Yeah, that snaps down. That's good. Okay. Well, I'll solder up that connection there, and then after that I'll put some black paint around that connection, which will also hold that fibre washer down, so we don't need to do anything else about that. And this is the mirror buffer, which I'll have to glue back in place, and that sits right in here. But it's all nice simple stuff. Before I solder that wire in, what I normally do is cock the shutter first, which takes the shutter blades back out of the picture so they're not exposed. And that way, when I'm soldering that wire back on, if I get a spatter of solder or a spatter of resin from the resin cord solder, it doesn't land on a shutter blade and make a dirty mark, which would be a problem to get rid of. Alright, you can see I've got that all in place. Wires soldered back. I've applied some black paint around there. That washer's not going to drift at all. I've got the buffer pad for the mirror in place here, and all I'm going to do now is, well, that's just about ready to go back in the camera body. But I see that there's a scratch here by that screw. Now, of course we didn't disturb that screw, so that scratch is there from whoever did last time. So I'm just putting a touch of the matte black paint across there so it's not a bright spot to reflect light back to the film. Not that I really think it would make much difference, that tiny scratch. Okay, so there we have the shutter. That's all ready to go really. We're ready to put that back on the camera body. Of course I want to get the shutter release correctly timed on that body, because the film release button, the film release shaft, the screw on the top of it, I had to dismantle that completely to get rid of the lacquer someone had put on it. So, getting this back on the camera body. So fitting the front back to the camera body. Yes, this can be done. It's not impossible. It's just awkward. Okay, so I'll start by placing the washers. I haven't got the mirror in here. I don't need it in here at the moment, and the later I put it in, the better, because otherwise I'm likely to end up putting a greasy fingerprint on it. So there are 3 washers in each position. These are dished washers. They're arranged so that they give you the maximum amount of crush distance. So it's concave surfaces to concave surfaces. Okay, I'm not putting any of that meter stuff in. I'm starting this with my capping plate latched down closed, my mirror plate flapping. That's the correct place to start this. The shutter here is in the released position. This arm on the shutter has to drop down into the gap here, between there and there. Now usually lower this in from the bottom. At the top, pull back the chrome trim slightly, lower this about halfway, press down the mirror tray from the edge, not the centre of the mirror, to get it down below the level of that buffer that we put in here. Two of the original screws I can put in at the base. Now remember, we've got those washers just stacked there. There's nothing holding them in place but some very unreliable gravity glue. So don't swing this round violently on the bench, otherwise you will displace the washers. And I'm putting two longer screws in at the top. Now those two longer screws I'm putting in there, and I'm just starting the threads and no more, to stop those washers getting away. So at the moment the front is not all the way back in. I'm checking that my mirror plate moves freely, and if I'd bothered to put the cam in first, we'd be good to go. So you can ignore everything I've said for the last 5 minutes. We'll call that a dress rehearsal. Let me find the cam. I've got that cam back in place. Lubricated the cam surfaces with some molybdenum paste. You can see the angle of that rectangular block across the front there. And you can probably see how much of the cam is the cutaway in the cam you can see there. That's probably the right place for that. That one's not sitting exactly where I'd normally expect it to sit, but I can tell by the adjustments that have been made to it, to the adjustment screw, that that's very likely where it began its life. This cam, I'm just running some molybdenum paste around that cam surface at the top. That'll sit on there. Now I've got a little bracket that I put in here to hold the spring, because I have to pre-tension that spring before I put the front on. I've got this bracket that I've made that holds that nicely. I used to have a simpler bracket which also worked, but was just a little bit more cumbersome to use. This system works better for me. Right, that's brackets in place, and that's in place. I've got a tool here to rotate that, because I've got to, that spring, which I'll zoom you in a bit. Where are we? There we are. That spring has to be rotated at least one full turn past this point. At the moment it's probably doing nothing at all. I've got a tool here which will do that for me. Get the tail of that spring hooked in onto my bracket. I can remove the tool, and that's my cam in position, tensioned up. Come on camera, keep up. You can see that the spring is just caught into the bracket. Okay, so that part's good. I'll now go through the tedious business of putting my stack of washers back in place, and hopefully this time because I have everything there, I'll actually be able to do the job. And this is slightly simpler than when I've got the meter cord and so forth in place, which then I've got to line up as well. Okay, so that's sitting there in the rest position. The washers are in place, the capping plate's down, the mirror plate is up, and I'll hook this into place. Get that lever in through the gap there at the bottom. Pull the chrome trim back lightly to press the mirror plate to make sure it doesn't get caught on that mirror buffer pad. Get 2 screws in at the bottom of the shutter. They just need to be in loosely. At the top, put 2 longer screws in because they'll hold the washers in position. Because it's very tedious if one of those washers is not in position and you get the camera closed up and then you find out afterwards. That's no fun at all. Right, this cam, I'm just going to press that across with the tip of a screwdriver to get it lined up. It's lined up. It's not quite engaged. I'm just going to touch the end of this rack in here with a screwdriver, move that slightly. Now I just felt that drop in, so we should be good. Now I'm holding this together just between finger and thumb. Let's crank the film advance, see what happens. It won't complete. It means the film advance won't complete the movement. That means that I'm 1 tooth too far advanced. If I forced this, I would break something. Okay, so at that position the shutter would actually be cocked. The mirror is down, but we can't release anything. I've just released the film advance lever, let that go back to the rest position. Okay, so that we're 1 tooth out at the front, I know that much. Now whether I can actually move the front loose, get back 1 extra tooth with the rack, I don't know. I'm going to have a go because it's easier than taking the whole thing off again. Okay, it completed that time. And the shutter wipe cocks and fires. So the timing's correct. Those 2 screws at the bottom, I can tighten those up. They don't need to be very tight. We're not setting the focus distance or anything at this stage. I just want to get the action of the shutter release correct so that it releases the film advance to allow you to wind on to the next shot. Right, so now I'll zoom out. Wind on, and if I press the shutter release very gently, I want to see if I can hear the film release before the shutter, which would tell me the screw was too high. We'll do this very gently. No, I certainly couldn't feel that. Oh yeah, the film release didn't go. The shutter fired before the film released to allow me to wind on. That tells me that the screw on the top of the film release is too low. If I unscrew it slightly, then it means that the pressure from the shutter release will hit that earlier in the stroke and it should move it. So I've got to fish down this hole, feel the screw, and I've turned that about half the turn. That seems to be it. I'm certainly not hearing the film advance release earlier than the shutter firing. But the film advance is being released at the right time because I was very gentle at releasing that shutter button. I took that very, very slowly. Okay, so that adjustment's correct. That means now that I can pull the front off, put the mirror, the meter cord and so forth in position, and then close the front back again. Oh. The Retina Reflex is to a certain extent you could say they were complicated cameras. There are so many things dependent on other things. Right, so I can take that front off, and I've got to get my meter cord and so forth in place. Well, it's pointless pretending that I can do that with the camera laying on its back. So I'll remove my spacing washers and get my meter stuff in place. Now that bracket I've got in here is holding that spring for me, so that should just stay there. I shouldn't need to fight with that. Okay, what do I want to achieve? Well, I've got to get, I did put that spring back on the front here that I'd taken off so I didn't lose it. I had to do that so that the shutter would work while I did this job. Here's the cord. Here's the drum. That's the screw for the drum at the top. And there's the little screw that stops the cord rolling off the pulleys. That should be all I need. I've got to clean this drum because I haven't done anything to that, and they're always sticky with dried grease. That'll do. Now, once upon a time there would have been a little cover plate like this glued over there. I suppose I might as well put one back since we're doing the job properly. Okay, well, I've got one of those little cover plates. I'll just put a bit of glue on it. And we'll drop that into place. I don't think I need to lock the position of that adjustment with lacquer. I'm quite happy that that was firm enough in its adjustment that it'll stay where it was put. Just give this a wipe with some synthetic grease. And put this in place. And the cord has to wrap around that drum around these twin pulleys in the correct positions, over the top of these pulleys and down into the camera. So I've got to slacken the screws on those pulleys up because I didn't have enough room to pull those cords down before. And then I need a special tool to pull the cord through, which I have.